Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
And greetings. Welcome to another week of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Dace with my co-host, who will never be my partner, Aaron McIntyre. Aaron, we are getting into some conference play and a lot of games on the slate, even with multiple bye weeks. A good week of action. You're looking forward to it.
I am. I'm actually preferring this year's schedule to previous years. I'd say just elongate the football season. Even if your favorite team isn't playing a couple of weekends during the season, elongate it as much as possible. For the first time, and I don't know what explains this. Now, during our day job, we had every weekend in August was a 3-day weekend. We were taping ahead, so August seemed like it went by really fast. For the first time in years, it seems like September is going by at a snail's pace. It usually is. You blink and September's over. The season is a third or more of the way over. I think part of it has to do with the way the schedule is unfolding. We're kind of getting this doled out, the college football season doled out piece by piece here. So I'm digging it. I'm ready to get into it this week.
Well, I've long said if one of the changes I'd make if I were college football commissioner is the whole season for everybody would start the weekend before Labor Day.
Yes.
And then we'd give everybody 2 bye weeks, that every school would have 2 bye weeks so that you could, make sure guys' grades are in order for midterms, guys have extra weeks to heal up and get healthy, et cetera. Okay, I think you would cut down on off-season shenanigans with less of downtime, too, and an earlier start to the season. We don't expand the season in terms of games or impact on the body because you have an extra bye week, but we just truncate that schedule up a little bit longer and elongate the season. There's plenty of content out there now with consolidation to keep it going for that extra couple of weeks, I think.
Is it just a calendar anomaly this year that we have 2 byes?
Yes.
Everybody has 2 byes?
Yep. Yeah, I don't know how many times that'll happen, but I think it ought to be a permanent thing. That's what I would do. All right, let's get to the Big Five this week on Bigger Ten, and let's start with a team in a school that probably wishes the season would just maybe end now, because it kind of already has. It has been, and I told you last year watching the first spring game for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, when they were out there in that blowing snow in early April up there in Madtown, trying to chuck and duck, with an air raid all over the yard. And it looked weak, anemic, sloppy. They didn't have the personnel for it. And I told you back then, and I said this on the show, remember, it reminded me a lot of Rich Rodriguez's first spring at Michigan, trying to take this pro-style system that had been here for 30 years and turn it into this like spread option attack with Ryan Mallett and Stephen Threed and Nick Sheridan at quarterback. Well, last year was a scuffling for Wisconsin. This year, they got off to a 2-0 start, but they did not look great against either of the MAC teams they played. They go out there against mighty Alabama, who still doesn't have Nick Saban, but Kalen DeBoer is no slouch as a coach. And, I mean, Tyler Van Dyke, the transfer quarterback, out for the year, gets hurt. First drive of the game, Alabama could have named its score in Madtown. And you start looking ahead at the overall depth of this conference, man. Illinois ranked. Indiana maybe should be ranked. Okay? Michigan State 3-0. All right.
Nebraska ranked.
Nebraska ranked. Rutgers has its highest preseason win total in like a decade. And you start looking around the rest of this league at Wisconsin, and you start maybe asking yourself if this thing with Luke Fickell is just cursed.
I kind of think it is. I mean, I caught bits and pieces of, I think it was Western Michigan, and then they played FCS South Dakota, which is a good FCS squad, but it's still FCS. And they didn't really look inspiring, like you said, in either of those games. Really, I mean, towards the end with South Dakota, they kind of pulled away a little bit, but just not anything really when you take into account last season. And so far through 3 games this season, nothing is really inspiring that much confidence. Whereas in previous years with Badger football, even under the final coach there of the Barry Alvarez hires, can't remember his name, that Luke Fickell replaced. You could always hang your hat on something. Always hang your hat. Usually it was the defense. In previous iterations of Wisconsin teams, you knew you were going to have a defense and you knew you were going to have a really killer running game. I'm not sure what they're hanging their hat on over in Madison right now, because it's not much. It's not inspiring confidence moving forward. So again, you got to kind of let this thing play out a little bit longer. One more season, and we're through a quarter of the season now. So maybe he can turn this around, but it's really not looking that much different or that much more successful than it was last year. And it's tough to do that. Phil Longo trying to build an offense, and you don't keep losing QBs left and right. That's not an easy job. That's not an easy task whatsoever. But overall, it just kind of looks stagnant and sloppy in Wisconsin right now. So I'm not really sure what the expectation level should be adjusted to right now for the Badgers, but it's not looking fun.
No, it's not. And they have a tough schedule awaiting them the rest of the way as well. Let's talk about a team that doesn't have a tough schedule awaiting them the rest of the way. In fact, they just won we presume to be one of the toughest games on their schedule, and they won it resoundingly. Indiana had not played a game in the Rose Bowl since they faced USC and O.J. Simpson, who won the national championship that year, in the 1968 Rose Bowl after the 1967 season. That's the longest. That's the second longest Rose Bowl drought of original teams in our league, and the last time Indiana even won a share of the Big Ten. But they were the clearly superior team against a UCLA team under a first-year coach in Deshaun Foster that just looked wholly unprepared. Curtis Rourke was clearly the better quarterback between him and Ethan Garbers. It was never really in doubt. Indiana had total control of this game in prime time on national TV at the Rose Bowl. And you start looking at the rest of their schedule, and you can keep Curtis Rourke healthy. I mean, you tell me where there's 4 definite losses on that schedule, because, brother, I don't see it. Can we put that schedule up right now, by the way? Do we have that schedule?
Yeah, let me get that
Can
for
we take
you
a look
real
at
quick.
it? Because and 8-4 seasons at Indiana don't happen all the time. But, I don't see a long laundry list of L's there for the Hoosiers on that schedule.
I'm starting to kind of believe, because the first 2 games you could kind of chalk it up to the quality of the opponent. This one, I expected them to win just based on the line, and people, making the lines in Vegas know a lot more than I do. But to get up and just absolutely jump UCLA the way that they did the other day, that turned my head. And I sent a text to a buddy of mine. I think it was their first game. Can't remember who they were playing. But Kurt Signetti, that really weird halftime interview. Hey, Coach, what changes do you need to make going into halftime? And he just laughs and walks away. I was like, this guy is kind of an ass. I mean, know your role, man. I mean, you knew what the job you were taking was. It's not an easy job at Indiana, but good grief, you don't really have the track record yet at Indiana to have that much swagger. He looked annoyed during the BTN bus tour. I'm like, what are they doing here? But I'm starting to believe in them just a little bit. They made it very clear what the expectations are. They have high expectations for themselves this season. And when you take into account that schedule, as you talked about, Steve, I don't know. We'll talk about this in the tweet poll, or poll results later on in the show. I'm starting to think that they could have a really successful season here. And successful would have been like 6 or 7. Successful could have been making a bowl game, but when you take into account that schedule, you think it could be a little bit more than that.
I mean, let's just go through these games. Tell me the game that they are not favored in according to the odds makers. Charlotte's one of the worst teams in FBS. Maryland at home, they're favored in that game. Yep. We just saw Maryland lose to Michigan State at home. At Northwestern, they're going to be favored in that game.
Not going to be favored against Nebraska, but
that it could be. I mean, I don't know if Nebraska loses to Illinois on Friday night. I mean, but if they're not, that's like probably what, Nebraska -3. Okay. Washington at home, they're probably favored in that game at home as things stand right now. At Michigan State, could be favored in that game. We don't know. Depends on probably what Michigan State does against Boston College. And that's, Michigan State has this gauntlet after this 3-0 start. We'll get into them in a minute. But their next month and a half, man, is a chore. Probably not favored at home against Michigan, a team they've beaten one time since 1987. But we have no idea.
Yeah, you don't know what the state of the Michigan program is.
I was just going to say that. We don't know. When teams that think they're playoff teams every year, and if you're out of the playoff race at the end of November, we have no idea how interested Michigan will be in that game on November 9th. We have no idea. We don't. At Ohio State, definitively will be an underdog. Purdue at home. So right now, Ohio State on the road for sure. Probably a slight underdog to Nebraska at home. as of right now, probably a definitive underdog, like a touchdown or so to Michigan at home. But I think Nebraska and the Michigan spreads are negotiable right now based on how the season plays out. The rest of those games, I think Indiana's probably favored.
And you look at, the Michigan thing, at least in recent memory, am I correct in saying that Michigan has played weird games in Bloomington too? So who knows how that'll shake out.
Yeah, under Tom Allen, both Ann Arbor and Bloomington, Indiana played us tough for several years. Yeah, very true.
So, I mean, you're looking at what could be easily like they're at 3-0. We expect them to be 6-0 going to Nebraska and then favored in 8 wins is I don't want to even say it's out of the realm of possibility. Based on how they're playing right now, we maybe should expect 8 wins out of this schedule.
I mean, if you're a Hoosier fan, you go 6-6, 7-5 now, you're probably disappointed, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so this Saturday, as we get to topic 3, I've kind of dubbed this Showdown Saturday. I think there are some games now for some teams that are facing each other that will get a really good read on who these teams are. Let's start with the first showdown. These are 2 of the top 5 or 6 programs in the history of this sport. They have not played a regular season game in Ann Arbor since 1958. Michigan and USC played a home-and-home in 1957 and 58. Other than that, they've only faced each other in a smattering of Rose Bowls as champions of the Big Ten and the now defunct Pac-10. But now they are each other's Big Ten conference opener. This will be the very first Big Ten game ever for the Trojans. They're right around a touchdown underdog, 5.5, 6, depending on where you look. This, by the way, is also going to be Miller Moss's very first road start as a quarterback. He has never started a true road game at USC. Remember, he was Caleb Williams' backup for a year and a half, then came on against Louisville in the Holiday Bowl last year, which was basically a home game for USC. The game against Vegas was pretty 50-50 between them and LSU, so he has never started a game in a true road environment. Michigan is switching quarterbacks. We talked about that on the channel on Michigan podcast yesterday, going to Alex Orji. We have this is a similar setup between Wink Martindale and Lincoln Riley that we saw against Steve Sarkisian. Basically, USC is mini Texas. They don't have it's the same kind of program, the same kind of offensive scheme. They're just not quite as deep and talented as Texas is, but not really sure what to expect out of Michigan with the quarterback change. The Wolverines have to know their backs against the wall. USC is coming off a bye, but now it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because they're going to face a different quarterback than they probably schemed and game planned for all of last week. So a ton of question marks here, Aaron. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. There's question marks. I'd say the Vegas game, yeah, maybe it was 50-50. I don't know if you listen to that game with the sound up. That's a different, and I'm not trying to go out of my way to diss, Michigan at all. That's a different environment than what he'll face at the Big House. Not taking anything away from the Big House at all, but it was much more raucous environment in Vegas than what he'll face here. And I do like the comparison to Texas. Miller Moss, he's a good quarterback. But is he a Quinn Ewers type of quarterback? Because, Texas was moving the ball on Michigan's defense pretty easily. But Quinn Ewers made a lot of really good plays on his own. So I don't really see that yet in Miller Moss. So, this is going to be a big question mark game. Alex Orji finally getting the start for Michigan. They're going to, like I said last week, you got to pick a guy and ride and die, and it sounds like they're going to ride or die with Alex Orji. And I do agree with your analysis on Michigan podcast yesterday. At the very least, it was like Iowa putting in Brendan Sullivan for their goal-to-go quarterback situations. It's just trying something to give the defense more to think about on any given down, and you have to do that with Orji's running ability. So, the spread is 5.5 in favor of USC as we sit here taping this on Wednesday. I'm not really sure. I think this is going to be probably a bigger tell of Michigan necessarily than USC at this point. For what the rest of the season, I think you all are probably adjusting your expectations. But now, with the news about Alex Orji, you're kind of readjusting them further, kind of waiting until you see more of this offense for Michigan to make a final judgment. But I don't really know what to make of this game because I do agree USC, it's kind of Texas light. But Miller Moss, I don't think is necessarily the same type of playmaker that Quinn Ewers is. So it'll be an interesting game, a fascinating game. A couple of weeks ago, kind of an afterthought to me. But now with the news from Michigan that Alex Orji is starting, trying to reboot something with that season, it's a little bit more intriguing to me than it was.
Another game I think that's a lot more intriguing to people than we thought it was heading into the year. This is another kind of a showdown game on Friday night in Lincoln, Nebraska. Illinois goes there ranked in the top 25 against the Huskers, also ranked in the top 25. These two teams have not played a game where they were both ranked since 1985 when they were in completely different conferences. Illinois in the Big Ten, back then Nebraska in a conference that no longer exists, the Big Eight. So that's how long it has been. This has been kind of the bellwether game for Nebraska in our league. Since the team that Nebraska, that has been kind of indicative of where how far Nebraska's fallen as a Big Ten member is Illinois. Illinois has basically owned them since Nebraska came to the Big Ten. And that's got to be, just as a fan of a blue blood myself, I mean, I can't even imagine what Husker Nation, what it's been like for the last decade or so, knowing you cannot take a win against Illinois, a program that has had some very high highs, but has struggled for a few generations at maintaining any level of consistency at all. And you can't guarantee that as a win. So this is another one of those like Colorado was, Aaron. This is the kind of game that Nebraska's lost a lot. Over the last few years in particular. They haven't had to face the specter of the one score knuckle, white knuckle game that they've lost consistently for the last 5 years because they've just been dominating teams for the most part. So you know what the game plan is going to be here for Illinois. Hang around like they did against Kansas. And then you try to win this game in the fourth quarter and see if you get some nervous Nellies over there on the big red sideline. How do you see this one?
I know you can get into trouble doing the transitive property games, but that's not going to stop me. I think Kansas has some issues. UNLV is not a bad team, but that should not have been a game. I mean, they've got some issues this year, and I'm not really sure how much stock to put in Illinois' win over Kansas. But I think you're right. That's the game plan, is just kind of stick around and wait for Nebraska to screw up. I'm taking Nebraska in this one. I don't think, should they not shoot themselves in the foot? But so far, they really haven't. Yeah, the offense didn't come back out on the field versus Colorado. They still handled that game really easily in a big spot there in prime time. I think Matt Rule has things turned around over at Nebraska. I'm not totally sold on Illinois being a legit or being good yet. Based on their resume, they can't be any better than they are right now. But I'm taking Nebraska in this one. I just think their talent superiority is vast across the board.
And then finally, for topic 5, we're going to cheat a little bit and turn this into a two-parter because it's the same setup here. We've got a Big Ten team off to a 3-0 start, going on the road as a slight underdog to an ACC foe, and to wrap up their non-conference portions of their schedules and kind of show us whether they're going to be fringe bowl teams or teams that, could really be surprise teams like we were just discussing with Indiana. You've got Rutgers going on the road to Virginia Tech, and the Hokies had that horrible loss to Vanderbilt to open the year as a 2-touchdown favorite. And so some of the luster is off of them as a potential sleeper in the ACC when they had the most returning production in that conference. And there, I think Rutgers, it's a 3.5-point underdog in that game. Michigan State, right around a touchdown underdog to Boston College, who, of course, ambushed Florida State in their season opener on a Sunday night. But I think we all recognize that Florida State's not going to be the team that we thought. They're going to be the rare top 10 team to start 0-3. It seems like, I think it's every year in the last 20 years. At least one preseason top 10 team in the AP poll is finished unranked. I think we probably know now which team that's going to be this year in Florida State. But still, it's a good start. Bill O'Brien is a good coach. And they played tough last week at Missouri. They were a 2-touchdown plus underdog in that game, and they were in it all the way down to the final stretch. And so Michigan State on the road there with Aiden Childs trying to steal another game like they did against Maryland and get to 4-0. So what's your read on these two games, which kind of have the same narrative here heading in? Yeah,
they're both going to be difficult environments for the road Big Ten teams, but I like Rutgers a lot better than Michigan State. This is going to be the red bandana game in prime time over in Boston College. Like you said, Bill O'Brien, I really dislike him just on a visceral level. He's kind of a jerk, but his players seem to love him, and he's a heck of a football coach, at least in college anyway. So I think they should be able. I mean, that's just going to be a tough environment for Aiden Childs to go into, I think. And so I like Rutgers. I just think the foundation at Rutgers is a lot more firm right now than it is at Michigan State. Obviously, they have coaching in a system in place there for years, whereas Jonathan Smith's trying to still build this thing. Both difficult environments to go in and win a game, but I like Rutgers' chances a lot more than Michigan State's.
All right. So that's our Big Five on Bigger 10 this week. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll play Would You Rather when we return. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. Let's start with you. Let's go right back to the topic we just finished on and put your money literally where your mouth is. Would you rather bet Rutgers or Michigan State money line in these non-conference games on the road in ACC country on Saturday?
Well, you'll see even more of this tomorrow when we do our confidence picks, but I'm going with Rutgers all of the way. And it's not to take away from Michigan State. They're having a good season so far. Maybe even a bit of a surprise being 3-0, especially knocking off Maryland. But I'm going with Rutgers. Both, like I said a few moments ago, both difficult environments to go into and win a game. But I just think for an 18-year-old like Aiden Childs going in at night against Boston College, which we think is a solid team, even under the first year of Bill O'Brien, I think that's probably too tall a task. It'll be a fun game to watch, don't get me wrong, but I like Rutgers here, and I would even bet them a money line on Saturday.
All right.
Next, would you rather bet UCLA or Charlotte to spring a massive upset this weekend? I believe UCLA is 24-point underdog, Charlotte 28 points.
I don't like either one of those, but I think I'd rather bet Charlotte. I just think the coaching mismatch here, you want to talk about unlikable guys, and Brian Kelly, I get it. You're also talking about a guy who's a college football Hall of Famer. And I just think the difference in preparation, environments. I mean, and when I say I'd rather bet Charlotte, I'm talking. I'd rather bet nothing on UCLA and $1 on Charlotte. Okay, so and I'm gonna give Charlotte the $1 on the grounds. Maybe you just catch Indiana with a what was that effort coming off? You know. That's maybe the biggest non-conference win Indiana's had since when?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, actually, it wasn't even a non-conference game because we're still not used to it being a conference game.
Okay? I forgot about that.
But I mean, the setting though was very non-conference. You're across the country. It's prime time. It's early September, right? I mean let's dial it back and say this. That was Indiana's best prime time showing since when?
2020 notwithstanding, I don't know.
Yeah, not the COVID year where there were no fans in the stands or anything. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're probably going back to Bill Mallory when he had it going there with Anthony Thompson and Vaughn Dunbar, which didn't play a lot of night games in the Big Ten back then, you know. So I'm making a case here for something I think there's no case for. Okay, I think Charlotte's one of the worst teams in the FBS.
Didn't they have most of their roster was like sick or injured or something coming into the season?
Yes. Yeah, and so I just think who would be the most likely to crap the bed? I think LSU's coming home, fired up to see that crowd after it literally escaped. I mean, it escaped South Carolina.
Yep.
A couple of pretty terrible calls on their behalf won them that game. And so I just think I think Deshaun Foster's not up for this job. That's what I think. Yep. But again, I wouldn't bet either one of these. For you, let's think really long term about who we think is legit here. Would you rather bet Caleb Johnson, who's leading the nation in rushing right now for Iowa? Would you rather bet Caleb Johnson to win the Heisman or Jonathan Smith to win National Coach of the Year? All right, so you got Caleb Johnson leading the nation in rushing for Iowa. So for a running back to win the Heisman, it's got to be like on a national. It's got to be on a playoff team, or you're putting a
best player on the best team.
Yeah. Yes. Or Jonathan Smith. Their original win total was 4.5. They've already got 3. So you're really saying you think they're going to be like a 9-3 kind of a team, all right, for him to win it. What do you think? Which one would you rather bet?
So Caleb Heisman has to be best player on the best team, and Iowa's nowhere close to being the best team. So that immediately eliminates him, and by process of elimination, I think the bar to win National Coach of the Year for Jonathan Smith is probably a lot lower than it would be for Caleb Johnson to win the Heisman. That's my thinking anyway. And hey, I'm not dissing Iowa. This is, quality of the opponent notwithstanding, they are miles beyond where they have been the last couple of years on offense, and I'm nowhere near where fans would like them to be still. But I'm still happy about that. But I just think the bar is lower for Jonathan Smith. Finally, would you rather have defensive issues to try to fix midseason? Obvious issues that have shown their faces multiple times already through the first portion of the season. Or would you rather have those defensive issues to fix or offensive issues?
Great question, but I definitely would rather have defensive issues.
Same.
I think it's
defense is always in basically every choice or every sport. Defense is a choice. Yes.
I think it's easier to substitute and scheme your way out of those issues than it is on offense. Everybody talks about Lincoln Riley. Guys like Lincoln Riley can scheme guys open. Yes and no. Okay. When you're recruiting the kind of skill talent he had at Oklahoma and he's trying to acquire at USC, it's a lot easier to scheme guys open, right? And ultimately, offense is about whether you've got the horses and whether they buy into the overall scheme, right? You're not going to emotionally coach guys up to run through the hole harder. It's not the way it works. There has to be a hole there, and they have to see it, okay? And so I would much rather have the defensive, particularly with the way the rules are set up. The rules are much more, this is why a program like Iowa is such an outlier the last few years with their offensive issues. But the rules are much more set up for a team to be 2019 LSU, where they're just blitzkrieging teams on the offensive side, but giving up over 400 yards a game on defense. The rules are much more is set up to advantage that team these days than can I, win, by holding teams to 17 or fewer points on defense every week. That's the much taller task nowadays.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, defense is always a choice. You have responsibilities. It's basically being at the right place at the right time. Another example of this, too, is, you brought up Iowa there. For the past 2 or 3 seasons, I've sat through Spencer Petras and Deacon Hill throwing, trying to throw to their wide receivers on an outright on the far hash. That is not an easy throw to make, but at this level, it needs to look easy. I've seen Spencer Petras and Deacon Hill chuck the ball 10 yards over the head of an open receiver. This year, Cade McNamara can hit that throw, and he's done that pretty consistently. Still not the offense that we would love to see, but that's an improvement, and that's just kind of goes to what you're saying. You got to have the horses in the right place at the right time, and it's a lot easier to do that on defense than it is on the offensive side of the ball.
Amen. All right, we'll come back. We'll wrap things up with our Twitter poll results and feedback of the week. Stay tuned. All right, this week's Twitter poll results, 1/4 of the way through the college football season. Which is more likely to be the outcome of the season? 42% of you said USC making the college football playoff, and they still have games against Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame still exist on USC's schedule. So you're saying essentially they're going to win at least one of those games and then beat everybody else. That Michigan would have a losing season, 18% of you voted for that. 40% of you saying Indiana would win 8 games. So what do you think of those results? Do you agree, disagree? What do you think?
After the conversation we had about Indiana today, I'm now this poll really should be 33-33-33, don't you think? Because I think all of these have the equal.
I think
amount.
Alex Orji is a high variance proposition at Michigan. I think they could go 9-1 or 3-6 the rest of the way. I think that's entirely possible.
If I had to do it over, I'd probably vote for Indiana to win 8 games than the other 2 options. But I think this should be a lot closer than it actually is, because I don't think people realize. And again, we hyped them up during the offseason. They hyped themselves up during the offseason. So the narrative hasn't quite caught up to Michigan yet. I don't think people understand the quarterback situation and how precarious that is there. Like you just said, Alex Orji is going to be boom or bust. This could go off the rails pretty easily, I would think, for Michigan. I'm not saying that with any glee whatsoever, but as an Iowa fan, okay, I see a lot of things in Michigan this year that I've seen. I've got the 1,000-yard stare or the 1,000-mile stare when I'm looking at Michigan's offense. So, Iowa won some games doing that, but it's really hard to do.
That brings us to our feedback of the week from Miguel Obo. I think that's how it goes. He says, Indiana looks legit, bro. Indeed, they do. That's in response to us welcoming Illinois back to the AP poll, and we think Indiana should be ranked instead of Michigan. And I think Indiana, can you imagine 6-0? Here, dude, here's a scenario. All right. What was the date? What was the date that Indiana is at Nebraska?
Let me pull up the schedule again.
October 19th. Okay. So I don't know what else is happening October 19th in college football, what the other games are.
Isn't that the huge game, or isn't that the huge? No, that's October 5th. October 5th is a huge day.
You know what? Let's look at what that week that is. Okay,
October
that
19th.
is that's week 8. All right, that's week 8. Alabama's at Tennessee. Okay, so already that's probably not happening. Okay, Alabama's at Tennessee. Miami's at Louisville. I don't know. You know what? This is possible. Like if Oklahoma beats Tennessee this weekend, could you imagine this? Looking at the rest of the schedule, I think no. Georgia's at Texas, so never mind.
Yeah, Georgia, okay. Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, Miami, Louisville.
I was thinking maybe if Tennessee lost a game or two, this could happen. But could you imagine College game day, Lincoln, Nebraska, 6-0 Indiana at 6-0 Nebraska?
And I think
the fact we even entertained this for a few seconds indicates how little this was on anybody's radar screen. But here we are.
Yeah, I think the following week, I think that's when Nebraska goes to Ohio State too. Boy, October is going to be a lot of fun. Basically, every single week is just going to be loaded for bear.
Indeed. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, follow. When you do those things, it helps us to find more Big Ten fans just like you, and we would love to find them, so help us to do that. You can also follow us on at Twitter X in between episodes at Bigger 10. At Bigger 10 is how you can follow us there. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you next week right here on Bigger 10.